You know, a year ago, I was introduced as your new president at our historic first ever all virtual annual business meeting. I got to tell you, this is a whole lot better. Now, back in June of 2020, we were really hopeful that the test center closures in the early months of the pandemic were really just a thing of the past. Those test center closures spurred us to accelerate our research and development of an online delivery option that provides the same experience as those taking the ARE in test centers. Now, we were also poised to adopt a severely reduced budget. We didn't know whether the pandemic would cause a serious reduction to NCARB revenues and investments. Our member boards were trying to adapt to a virtual environment, addressing shortfalls in the ability of state and jurisdictional governments to either support full service remotely, or safely support boards, staffs, and customers on site. Our licensure candidate record holders were uncertain about their lives, ranging from delivery of collegiate curriculum to finding jobs and means to continue recording AXP hours. Our architect stakeholders, member board members and record holders alike, were grappling with the uncertainty of billings, new projects, and just the ability to continue work. And you know, people have inquired about my year as your president of NCARB, and I responded with terms like, well, it's been unusual, it's been weird, it's been challenging, but you know, it's also been surprising and successful. In the past 12 months, we've once again seen that our council, including all of you, has remained resilient, has met the challenge of maintaining and improving our tools to protect the public, and we've sustained momentum with our new ways of engaging with all of our shareholders and stakeholders. Now, even as we endured a summer of questions and challenges, by December, we did emerge with an online ARE delivery option that provides a more flexible and focused exam experience, with almost 30% of the candidates choosing and using this new option. Now, our board of directors held the line on exam evolution, and we moved key items back into the budget as it became increasingly clear that the council remained, as John said, on strong, solid financial footing. Now, as an architect and president of NCARB, I've always known that architects are important influencers on how we live in the built environment. Now, for example, a lot of the conflict that happened in the Wild West could have been avoided had architects in those days just made towns big enough for everyone. Okay, I'm going to go back and give you some background. Back in the old days, these guys would say, you know, this town ain't big enough for both of us. So I'll go back. For example, a lot of the conflict that happened in the Wild West could have been avoided. Architects in those days just made towns big enough for everyone. Well, maybe it's for city planners. Well, one of my key areas of focus was to take sticky issues that have been percolating for years. Even if the search for results extends way past my presidency, and even if along the way we acknowledge discomfort and lack of consensus. Now, I set up a new task force on incidental practice. You know, for years, there has been no consistent model law language to acknowledge the reality of occasional overlap between disciplines in the building design environment. This really necessitates a clear understanding of boundaries regarding sustained practice by credentialed individuals. So, how much can an architect or an engineer perform with the other's discipline without jeopardizing the health, safety, and welfare of the public? The old adage, know what you don't know, just won't suffice. Now, in this first year, the Incidental Practice Task Force included representatives from the regulatory organizations overseeing engineering, interior design, and landscape architecture. Now, as Mike said, these three disciplines are often co-located with architecture on jurisdictional licensing boards. Now, the leaders of the three national regulatory organizations, CIDQ, CLARB, and NCEES, are joined with NCARB in the Inter-Organizational Council on Regulation, known as ICOR. Now, for the first time in our history, the NCARB board was pleased to host discussions with the leaders from all three of these organizations at our virtual board meetings this year. Now, I think we have a great opportunity to have good dialogue between our organizations pertaining to the regulatory environment and to discuss and solve the thorny issues of incidental practice between architect and engineer, architects and interior designers. Now, we are hopeful that through shared research and a focus on public protection rather than professional rivalry, that a consensus may emerge over time that will be useful to our board members, and it'll provide clarity to legislators, public officials, and the public. Now, I also set up a task force on responsible charge. In listening to various NCARB committees in the past several years, it's been clear there's a gap between perspectives on what the term responsible charge really means. Now, this gap creates a dilemma for consistent enforcement across our jurisdictional boundaries. The work of this task force is considering various philosophical beliefs, best practices in large, medium, and small firms, and the rigor that currently assigns competency to practice when one initially receives a license. Now, we continue to believe that the ability of jurisdictions to license and hold accountable the individual practitioner is paramount to protecting the public consumer. We have got to ensure that a responsible architect is exerting sufficient oversight to satisfy their duty of public protection. So I believe it to be a prevalent practice for an architect to seal a document with little or even no knowledge or involvement in its origin or production, but instead they rely and trust their firm's expertise. So, what are the reasonable expectations for all practitioners regarding the necessary knowledge required prior to sealing and signing a technical submission? We're certainly going to see more to come from this task force. Now, we've also been looking at the path to licensure for many years. The Program Continuum Advisory Committee, known as PCAC, and it's composed of the chairs of the Examination, Education, Experience, Policy Advisory Committee, and along with the Futures Collaborative, completed their second year looking at our average 12-year continuum to licensure and beyond. Now, they were charged to design future model prototypes for future discussion. Our existing model has traditionally been a linear progression from education to experience to exam to licensure, with an analogy to the three-legged stool. Now, I think, and the board thinks, that the future path or licensing model will be more flexible, it's going to be more accessible, and it's going to be more affordable in time and money, but while still delivering the necessary rigor to verify the required competencies in a variety of new and creative ways. Now, I also issued charges to other committees that were designed to move the ball forward. In its third year, our Diversity Collaborative was asked to move from issue identification to recommendations for creating an environment that better encourages diversity, equity, and inclusion within our NCARB volunteer culture and leadership ranks. Now, that collaborative reviewed feedback from focus groups composed of member board members from underrepresented groups. The collaborative also listened to governance approaches taken from other organizations like CLARB. And the collaborative delivered to the NCARB board important conclusions and recommendations, including updating our statement on diversity, resolution drafts addressing governance, and a desire to foster a more inclusive and equitable volunteer culture through ideas. Now, ideas like encouragement of participation, diversification of candidates for regional and national office, continued efforts to raise awareness and create forums for additional knowledge and idea exchanges throughout our programs and organization. Now, the board has acted upon many of the collaborative's findings and recommendations, and as you'll hear from President-elect Alfred Vidari, the board is very intent upon going deeper with these discussions in the coming year. Now, a statement on diversity has been distributed. It is posted in the lobby out there. A resolution on term limits is before the council on Saturday. And we are seeing greater diversity and diversity of thought in the pipeline of all 6 regions, which can lead to greater diversity on the NCARB board. Now, and of course, later in this annual meeting, I'll pass the torch to Alfred as NCARB's first Latino president, and I'll welcome new Region 6 Director Sylvia Kwan, the board's first Asian American female member. Now, as referenced by Mike regarding the Baseline on Belonging initiative, we are in partnership with the National Organization of Architects, NOMA, on studying the causes and documenting the concerns regarding attrition on the licensure path by underrepresented groups. Now, in another historic first this past year, we hosted leaders from NOMA for the first time at an NCARB board meeting. And we're very pleased to have 2 NOMA colleagues attending this meeting in person. Now, early this year, NOMA joined the community of architectural collaterals and participated for the first time in the Collateral Leaders Summit. Now, as you saw in the video, my daughter Molly is on her path to licensure, and I hope will eventually lead our firm. I'm certainly sensitive to a woman's experience along the path to licensure, and I'm well aware of certain biases and impediments in that journey that have got to be addressed. Now, we're also adding a new section to the annual NCARB by the Numbers publication, referencing the ARE performance by demographic groups, both at the national and the 55 jurisdictional levels. Now, these data sets have been released to each of our member jurisdictions, and I hope these data sets might be included in the examination section of the joint NCARB-NOMA Baseline on Belonging Attrition Study. These data sets highlight that there is still much work to be done by everyone in the licensure continuum. Now, determining how we can best inform the discussion and respond to these findings will be a key focus for us all as we discuss and discover what this new data means, along with identifying what action can we take to improve equity on the path to licensure. Now, another NCARB achievement this year is the completion of what we have called the shadow exam, more formally known as the business continuity exam. Now, for many years, NCARB has maintained a long-term strategic fund allocated to risks and opportunities like supporting this particular effort. So 3 years ago, we provided funds from our strategic reserves to create a backup version of the ARE as a safeguard against the risk of a massive exam breach. This exam is up to date. It'll be regularly refreshed and protected from cyber attack or other security compromises. Our diligent volunteers, paid consultants, and staff really help position us to maintain the licensure pipeline should the current exam be seriously compromised. So instead of going dark for up to 2 years without a backup exam, we'll now be able to step in with this business continuity exam within weeks. Now, we'll also resume our effort for a possible mutual recognition agreement with the United Kingdom, which was paused by the UK government because of other mutual recognition priorities connected to the Brexit process. Now, speaking internationally, Russia. I hate Russian dolls. They're just so full of themselves. All of our committees and task forces have done amazing work, especially when one considers the distractions of the past year, including personal, professional pressures, and the challenges of this all weird, all virtual environment. Our over 400 volunteers have indeed managed not only to do the work, but to go further. Now, one of the unanticipated benefits of the virtual environment, however, is that I've been able to observe more committee meetings than any of my predecessors. By zooming in like a fly on the wall, I've seen firsthand the excellent leadership of our chairs, the hard work of the participants, and the steady hands of our staff liaison. Now, I'm amazed, I'm encouraged, and I'm pleasantly surprised at the council's work performed in this past year. And I'm enthusiastic about the better dynamics and the work to come when committees finally are once again face-to-face, captive in a hotel conference room for 2 days. I know you all miss that, and it's coming back. While I've not been with you in person, I've had the privilege of seeing many of you in action. My hat's off to all of you who have volunteered, and also to you wearing your member board hats in these unusual times. Now, I've spent many years serving my New Mexico board, and they're down here in front. Thank you. I've enjoyed working with my Region 6 colleagues, and now with the succession of very talented NCARB board members and exceptional staff. Back home in Albuquerque, my family and my firm have remained supportive and flexible as I pursued my NCARB journey to here today. I could not have pursued my NCARB path these many years without the support, encouragement, coaching, and yes, advice from my loving wife, Mary, back there in the back, and I sincerely thank her. Thank you, Mary. Well, this journey certainly took an unexpected turn in the last year, and yet my faith in our mission and my respect for our community has only become stronger. Now, during the pandemic, we all were looking for unique ways to occupy our time outdoors. I tried to organize an NCARB hide-and-seek tournament, but it was a total and complete failure. You know, good players are just so hard to find. And yes, my grandkids will not be required to furnish my attempt at levity in my speeches any longer. We have important issues on the horizon. The future of licensure will remain an important focus, illuminated by the data from the analysis of practice. And we've got to continue to fight deregulation efforts at the legislative level. And we've got to acknowledge to legislators that the way practitioners are evolving their practice with issues like responsible control and incidental practice. We also need to get the governors to diversify their appointments to licensing boards. And to remember, it's the obligation of all of us to foster an inclusive and equitable culture and apply our creative thinking toward how the regulatory process can address the public protection needs of society through measuring competency in a possibly new, relevant, and fair manner with our new look at the path to licensure and beyond. Now, I plan to be around for these conversations, and I look forward to seeing how we will work together in the coming years. So, as I wrap up my year as president, it's really so great to be with many of you in person and to see many of you virtually. Many of you have become my good friends, and I'm proud to be a part of this great and important community. Again, thank you for your untiring commitment and the work for our mission. As we say in New Mexico, adios, amigos, and vaya con Dios.